boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Comics. I am your host, Jim Biscardi, VP of Business Development over at Image Comics, and this is the show where we go one-on-one with your favorite creators in comics to talk about how they got in, what it takes to stay in, what they're still doing in it, and what they've got coming up in the world of comics. Today's guest is a longtime friend of mine and someone I've been lucky enough to kind of watch and grow from, being a breakout Marvel talent to being quite possibly one of the sharpest visual storytellers comics has to offer, really. And now he's making his long-awaited creator-owned debut here at Image. Of course, I'm talking about Dave Marquez. You probably know David from books like Miles Morales or Iron Man, or more recently, Uncanny X-Men. But today we're diving into his new book coming out in just a few short weeks. It's called The UnChosen. It's the first time that he is writing and drawing a series from the ground up. It's a bit of a post-apocalyptic mind bender that's kind of like Last of Us meets The Matrix with a little... maybe some My Hero Academia mixed in, a little Evangelion weirdness for good measure. But all in all, it is full of action, full of magic, and is deeply personal. This is a story that, is about trauma and agency and how we learn to talk to each other after we've been hurt. It's a phenomenal first issue. I've read it, obviously, but I think you're going to love it too. And so we talk about all that. We're going to talk about the book's kind of long development, what David learned over the last decade working with some of the biggest names in comics at the time, and why doing something like this, doing this project in particular, kind of feels like coming home, and not just doing to creator-owned comics, but like to the books that made him fall in love with all of this stuff in the first place. You know the business. As always, please, if you're listening to this and you're enjoying it, take a screenshot, share it on social media, tag me, tag Image, tag David. We'll share it. We'll share the heck out of it, I promise. Leave a review on iTunes, 5-star review on iTunes. If I read it on the air, we'll send you a shiny sticker. And then also, too, leave some reviews, leave some comments on Spotify. You can do that as well. All right. Without further ado, let's jump into this thing. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's talk comics. David, man. Welcome.
Thanks, Jim, man. Good to see you.
You've had a career up to basically to this point, right? Like it's wild to think how far you and I go back a bit, and to see kind of, I remember seeing your stuff for the first time on that Marvel Season 1 book you did. It's Fantastic Four, right? Yeah. And I was like, oh shit, this is the goods. And then from there, you basically went to go work on every big book under the sun. I guess, like, for you, kind of looking back on your creative journey, what's that been like?
I've been very fortunate, and there's a lot of hard work behind there as well. But luck's always a certain part of it as well. Case in point. So when I first broke into Marvel, I did like an issue of Secret Warriors, and then was starting to work on another project when I got looped in to do the FF Season 1 book, and then started working on another project, kind of like, tinkering around with it. And then Brian Bendis had come across, I guess they were passing around the Season 1 books kind of as internal ads, for like, here's some of the up and coming people we just kind of found. Anyone like anybody that you're seeing? And Brian happened to see my FF Season 1 book, and thought that, it'd be cool to see what I would do on an issue of Ultimate Spider-Man. So, like, if not for the fact that right point, right place, right time,
Sure.
But no, I mean, it's been very, very crazy last, I guess, 10, 12 years, which I still, it's funny, I feel like a rookie still. I feel like I'm just breaking in, and yet it's like, I look at it and like, oh, now I'm the guy with the gray hair, it's it kind of sneaks up on you. But
sure.
no, I mean, I am both proud of and appreciative of the opportunities to work on so many big projects. A
Mm-hmm.
big part of that, certainly when I was at Marvel, was the fact that Brian Bendis and I became such good friends, such good
Right.
collaborators, that he had his kind of like pick of the litter when it came to projects,
Right.
and as one of his like kind of like pet artists, I suppose he would like to kind of figure like we're gonna make him fit, and then Alex Maleev would be another guy.
Yeah.
So there is this kind of like pattern a lot of times in comics that you will have. I even gave this advice at one point, like given the prominence of writers within the comics industry broadly, and certainly at the big two, and that they are the ones who, because of schedule and publication deadlines and everything, they're the ones that are typically the through line in any given book.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas artists are more likely to hop around because the likelihood of an artist drawing an issue 4 weeks, every 4 weeks for years on end, assuming you're not on a faster than monthly schedule, that's just really hard
Right.
to do. The point I'm getting at, it's oftentimes very helpful if an artist and a writer can pair up, both for the writer because they're writing to somebody who they're familiar with, but for the artist also. I benefited a lot from being partnered with one of the biggest writers in comics for so
Sure.
long, and there are other examples of that. And I benefited greatly both kind of career wise, but also just like getting to watch a master of their craft do what they do,
Mm-hmm.
and both through just kind of like watching them, like almost like through like osmosis, kind of picking up storytelling tricks here and there, but also very consciously observing and trying to like tear apart what makes this scene work, what makes all that kind of work. Like I got to kind of like audit like
Mm-hmm.
a comic writing masterclass for the last 10 years. And after Brian left Marvel and he and I did a little bit of work at DC together, I worked with other writers kind of since then. Although Brian and I still kind of we're still really good
Mm-hmm.
friends. And we're tinkering with some stuff, but I've worked with Tom King, I've worked with Josh Williamson, working with Gail Simone now on Uncanny X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with Jason Aaron briefly. I worked not so brief, like 6 months or so on Avengers. So like
Yeah.
I've gotten to work with other very very talented and accomplished writers, and that has been very educational as well. Seeing the way that the different folks kind of approach writing on from the big to the small scale.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to more directly kind of tie it back to your question. Like
Yeah.
it's been a wild last 10 years. I am like I said grateful having worked on all these awesome projects. Also, though, I got to kind of watch the best of the best do their job,
Sure.
while hopefully I brought as much of my A game as possible. And now I get to try to put some of my secret notes to use.
Well, so like that's kind of where I'd love to go next, right? In just talking about, I obviously, in doing this, I talk to a lot of different creators, in various roles, and so where when does the itch happen for you? When does that start to say, all right, I'm working with a bunch of phenomenal creatives, having the time of my life. I want to do my own thing. When does that start to itch?
The issue was kind of always there, but it
Sure.
started becoming harder to ignore. Um, I'm not sure whether I would put it on like a specific timeline,
Okay.
but for me, it's I'd done a lot of work at Marvel,
Yep.
then I'd done some work at DC. I'd worked on launch books. I'd worked on events.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Right.
I've gotten to do the biggest of what the big two have to offer,
Right.
and uh, I it's not that I didn't want to do that anymore, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
the one thing I haven't got to do though is like really do my own thing without other people to have to please,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because even when I'm working with again like the best of the best, Brian, Gail, Tom, Josh, like Jason Aaron, I'm trying to make them happy too, you know?
Right.
I'm trying to service the story that they have started, and it becomes a collaboration. Don't get me wrong. Like I don't. I'm certainly not someone who believes that like the art is subservient to the writing. Nor do I think most writers view the relationship that way. But I'm trying to do my best with something where another person's intentions and feelings matter, you know. And I'm just selfish. I want to do my own thing. No, it's there were still things that I wanted to do that I couldn't find ways of working in there.
Sure.
And certainly I can always try pitching my own thing with Marvel or DC and doing it that way. But one, I kind of want to do with my own toys for one, and two, like to Marvel and DC's credit, like they're not going to. In most cases, they want to see some proof you can actually do the job before that kind of stuff happens. Rightfully so. So part of it was like I wanted to do things my own way with my own toys to tell the kind of story that I haven't had a chance to tell in the Marvel and DC universe within that kind of like collaborative framework. It is great for everything that we've done. The thing that I want to do doesn't really fit within that.
Yeah.
And so I had the opportunity to take some little time off Big Two work, and so I spent like a year writing and drawing what is now the UnChosen. And kind of to your point about how the itch has always been there, like I'm sure a lot of creators, writers, artists, otherwise have all these kind of like seeds of ideas floating around the back of their head where they listen to a podcast, they read a book, they have an idea, or just walking around.
Right.
And so I have a few of those, and one of them, and the one I think that was maybe like the most well formed,
Sure.
and that I felt most kind of attached to was this. And it's one of the dangers with a lot of people when they first start either writing or creating. And Brian, he and I talk about this a whole lot with him in context of the class that he teaches around writing comics. That when you start writing, everybody wants to write the grand opus, right? It's everyone wants to write their Lord of the Rings, their Star Wars, their whatever else. And so there's danger one of like, okay, well, first of all, like start small. That's what's one piece of it, because you can write one page before you can write 8 pages before you can write 1,000, right?
Right.
The other side of it is like, or because it's so precious to you, you kind of want to save it because you want to. You don't want to mess it up, right? So you want to wait until time feels right just to do it. And I kind of fought with both those urges, kind of going into this one, because it's an idea that I had for a long time, and I had pretty well, kind of structured in my head and on paper in some ways. But I found myself both like, oh, this is going to be the most important thing ever, and so I have to open up in the most grand, sweeping, kind of way.
Sure.
But also like, oh, but if this is the story I really want to tell, I want to make sure I do it well. I don't want to mess it up. And I was, well, I should just write it, because if this is what I'm most passionate about, and I have the most ideas for it, like it is the easiest way on. It is the one that I feel the most motivation to actually do. Knowing that I will make mistakes here and there, and that's part of the creative process.
Right.
But
now
hope-
you come at
No, go
this
on.
from a little bit of a different way, right? Being an artist, right? Where
Sure.
So do you find yourself, when setting the story up, doing it a bit more traditionally, like given how you've seen some of the other writers do it and whatever, or like is there wiggle room for you because you have the full picture in your head? Like how do you break it down, and how do you work out things like pacing and between action and the drama and the quiet moments and things like that? Do you feel you do it differently than maybe it is traditionally done?
I trained in writing, for lack of a better term, like by drawing comics written by masters and like trying to analyze it and break it down. And so like for me, the image of a comic book script is like a Brian Bendis script. And if people will eventually I'll be publishing as back matter and some of the stuff.
Yeah.
A full breakdown of the page from script, through to colors and stuff. Like it looks like full script. One of the things that I really enjoy about working from a full script is the dialogue.
Okay.
I really enjoy characters and emotion, and it's something that I'm very grateful to readers that is something that they typically give me good feedback on. That yes, they engage with that as well. That's what I enjoy drawing. It's what I enjoy writing, and it's what people seem to enjoy in my work. So part of the reason why I do approach from a full script standpoint is I want to be able to be like live with the characters before I actually try putting them on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Getting a sense of the personalities, getting a sense of the emotional beats of the story, how they react to it. Um, I mean, in terms of like craft, I just kind of play pretend and then put it on paper, more or less. And I don't know how other people describe it, but that's what it feels like to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have a pretend movie in my head, and then I put it on paper, and then then I realize like, oh, I need to tweak this, I need to change that, etc. It's a very kind of recursive process. I put it on paper, then I see how it all fits together, then I change it, and then it's all kind of like this, like a putting on a rehearsal in your head. You're constantly modifying.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I think is perhaps different from what I see in a lot of published big two scripts from writers is like my scene descriptions are much more minimal, and
Okay.
my set direction is much more minimal. That's stuff where like I will put down the bare bones so I know what's there, and it might be even like a word a period, a word a period, a word a period, just kind of like references so I know what needs to go there. I know I can lean on my own artistic talents in order to kind of cover those bases. The
Mm-hmm.
stuff that I need to be able to reference is like what are the characters processing and going through at the time. That's maybe the most important part of it for me.
Mm-hmm. How do you like? Is there a sense of when you're coming up with ideas? I feel like there could be like a kind of like almost creative cannibalization in a sense, right? Where like you've got an idea for either a big set piece or whatever, but maybe it doesn't fit right, for the story in that moment. How do you deal with that kind of tug of war a little bit, knowing that you're the one driving the car? You can do what you want.
Yeah, no, that's a really insightful question. One of the biggest challenges I think with writing that I've experienced thus far anyway is having to acknowledge when something isn't working
Mm-hmm.
or when like this isn't the place for that either in this on this page in this issue or chapter or whatever or even in this story. So the Unchosen is, and we kind of have skipped over kind of what the whole thing is
Yeah, no,
about.
I was gonna. That was literally gonna be my next my next
I'll
question.
leave that. I'll leave that to be the next one. The place where I've seen that challenge that you described most specifically is, well, I guess it's twofold. One is like I have started doing some writing on a freelance basis, and so that I'll find myself having ideas and almost feeling selfish around them, like, oh, but I don't want to use this one. I don't want to give this one away. I want to keep this one for myself. So like that happens,
Sure.
and then also kind of on the flip side, it's trying to not let like scope creep become too much of an issue on the
Right.
project, like the Unchosen. It is a book that hinges less in the first issue, more later on a lot of kind of like big concepty stuff. As I like any sci-fi or fantasy fan, like the
Mm-hmm.
crazy ideas are part of the fun. And I love just like exploring it and expanding on those kind of like the big crazy ideas underpinning the way the world works. Knowing when to call it quits, it
Mm-hmm.
can be important. Like I can remember who some famous writer quoted about the idea of like in any given good, let's call it sci-fi story, it's like you can have like 1 to 3 big ideas and leave it at that. Beyond that, like it can become too much going on, and you get lost. The story can lose its heart.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether it needs to be like that tightly prescribed. It can only be 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. But the general principle of like, yeah, stick to the one that seems to fit this story most, or 2 or 3, whatever it is. And then there can be other opportunities to better explore some of the other ideas that are maybe tangential or related, but aren't as integral to the one story you're telling.
Okay. I love that. All right, so yeah, let's set the groundwork for what the Unchosen is. You mentioned that this is an idea that had kind of been sitting with you for a little bit. let's let's say what the book is about, and then I'll work backwards a little bit about how some of the pieces kind of fell into place, and then we can go from there. All right. So like, what's the elevator pitch for the Unchosen?
Sure. So the way we've been kind of putting out there for the slits and everything, it's the story of a young teenager, Aida, who has awoken to find herself in the midst of just a destroyed city. And very shortly thereafter, she's told that she is the one that caused that, but she has no memory of how she got there, of what happened, much less having anything like a power that would actually cause this kind of thing. It's all completely foreign to her. She finds herself kind of caught between two forces, wielding these incredible magical powers that both seem to want her for something. And it might have something to do with the end of the world, and that she might be the center of all of it. But there's a big question about like whether or not anybody actually has her interest at heart. And so that's the setup.
Okay.
The gist of it, the this meets that. It's um, you know tonally, Image has attaches a little bit to kind of like The Last of Us a little bit, and tonally I can see how they can match a little bit, and the semi kind of post-apocalyptic vibe of it.
Mm-hmm.
Conceptually, I think a better fit for it would be something like, and this is maybe dating myself with some of the references, but it's a bit of like Harry Potter and the Matrix meets Stranger Things,
Okay.
with a big hefty dose of like, I don't know, like the Invisibles and '90s era X Men meets Grant Morrison era X Men meets like Promethea. So
Okay.
like, so it's action heavy.
Yep.
It's fun. People are pretty. People look cool. They do cool shit. Um,
I'm not
and then
gonna lie.
underneath,
Reading the first issue, I got some manga vibes on it a little bit.
thank you. Yeah,
Um.
no. Akira and Neon Genesis Evangelion are both huge influences on it as well, both
Okay.
aesthetically and then also just like some of the conceptual stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so like underneath the surface of all of that, like there's some philosophical slash like big sci-fi fantasy big concept stuff there that's fun to explore as well. But hopefully, it's like you come for the action, then maybe afterwards you think about some of the ideas a little bit as well. So,
All right. So okay. So then,
yeah,
so how do a bunch of these ideas really begin to crystallize for you, right? And then actually become what this book is.
yeah.
Um. Yeah. We'll go ahead.
So yeah. No, so the opening scene is the thing that's been in my head for a decade plus.
Okay.
It's lived in different forms. Like it's been different characters getting there in different ways for different reasons, etc. But the idea of like in the beginning there was the word. You see someone slowly waking up, and you pull way back. They're in the middle of a giant, massive destruction, and they just say "fuck." You know, it's a joke. It's meant to be a little bit irreverent. But that opening scene has just like it. I don't remember like how I came up with it or whatever, or it's so amazing came up with where that scene came from.
Sure.
But it hooked me the first time that it kind of came into form in my head, and even to this day, I think it's a pretty decent hook for getting a story going. The book is very much kind of playing with around ideas of like language and magic and stuff, and so from the very beginning, that is like it's literally the first two words of the story, and it plays a thematic role kind of throughout. So it opens playing with action, a little bit of humor, and there's like subtle conceptual stuff being laid down kind of throughout. How it is more like the formation of the scene and the idea and stuff like that's harder to get into without getting way too spoilery with it. But for a long time, I've been very fascinated with the idea, with a lot of like ideas underpinning like the mythology, the expanded mythology around like the Abrahamic religions. So
Okay.
like, um, this is not a book about angels. This is not a book about angels. I'm playing very fast and loose with some ideas that are loosely associated with like the expanded universe of kind of like old school like Abrahamic religion stuff.
Yeah.
And then also looking at like things like comparative religion and looking at commonalities between different mythologies and faith traditions and everything. Um, that subject matter fascinates me to no end, and I'm a hobbyist dabbler, reading about this kind of stuff. So
Okay.
that plays a really huge role in a lot of this.
Where does I mean do you where does that kind of go back to for you? Like, is that just something that like you came across one day and just got hooked, or?
I mean, yeah. So the other side of it is like, and this is, I've been mentioning it a couple times in podcasts, and I hadn't necessarily meant for this to become like such like a certain way that I talk about it, but it is kind of the most honest way of talking about it. So, like, I am not particularly like spiritual or religious. I'm not closed off to it, but I don't
Right.
prescribe to any specific kind of belief. I was raised in a very like not like not like a strict but not like fundamentalist kind of conservative religious background,
Okay.
and in my teenage years I left the faith and I was angry for a long time kind of around my general experience
Mm-hmm.
of it. And I've since come to have a much more nuanced and flexible and curious approach to all of it. It's something
Yeah.
that happens to a lot of people as you get older. You mellow a little bit. But in a lot of ways, and so oftentimes in Christian circles, the term for that is deconstruction. The idea of
Yep.
it can be either like you're deconstructing your faith just from the regards of like, well, you're trying to put an analytical lens to understand better what it is you believe, and put some parameters around different things that haven't been examined before. It doesn't have to be like a leaving the faith thing necessarily. For me, it was.
Mm-hmm.
But this book, in a lot of kind of ways, like is kind of it's a therapy journal laid out of me processing my deconstruction and then construction of whatever the new worldview is in a
Mm-hmm.
very abstract and allegorical way. This is not a literal thing. I'm not making any statements about the world in it.
Sure.
This is much more like vibes, I suppose, than that. But I mean, like, yeah, there are certain characters who are very angry, and there's a part of me that's in that. There's some that are curious. There's some that are accepting. There's some that are authoritarian. There are some that are revolutionary. Like it's writers will always talk about the way in which like a lot of times you're working through some shit when you're putting stuff on the page. Some of that was intentional and some of it was not for as the things kind of tend to be. It's a book about you know it's about kind of betrayal and trust and family and finding agency for yourself
Mm-hmm.
is a big part of it.
Okay.
It can be very easy to get too abstract when talking about this kind of stuff, but
Right.
like this is the when I approach story, I approach it very thematically and character oriented. So when I started developing the characters, for the project, I wanted to make sure that I kind of knew what it was that each of them, like where they were and where they wanted to go,
Mm-hmm. Was
or if they
Aida
even knew.
the first character that you had in mind for this, or?
Not at all. So I mean, the original version of the story had something kind of like a Brother Riley character and something like an Aida character. Like
Okay.
I had two, in roughly the shape of them. For a long time, the Brother Riley character, and for people when you finally read the comic, he is, for lack of a better term, kind of like the Obi-Wan kind of ish character a
Okay.
little bit. In kind of like a halfway between the prequels and original trilogy kind of version. He was much more the main character. And then I realized more and more as I was exploring, I'm like, actually, she's a much more interesting character for this. And so, it's the story is also about kind of like taking the idea of like your classical chosen one golden child,
Mm-hmm.
a story, and not that I'm by any means the first one ever to kind of explore from this perspective, but like to
Right.
deconstruct it a little bit, to pick apart out a little bit. Like I am a big believer that like I don't know, like I'm very skeptical of hero worship in the world,
Okay.
and I think one of the reasons why we're so attracted to the idea of like these kind of chosen one narratives is, well, one of which is like we all want to be the hero of our own story. There's that aspect of it, but then also I think a lot of times it's like we all want to believe. I don't know how to phrase it. Like we want to believe that there is a grand narrative to the world, and that it kind of like fits our expectations, and that heroes are, and that there are heroes we can look up to and aspire to be, can trust, can rely on. And not to get too overly political about all this kind of stuff, like I think that like the lived experience of the last 20 years,
Yeah.
10,000 years shows that that isn't really the case. And so I think, but while it's fun to have a very kind of straightforward chosen one narrative or golden child narrative like you have in Harry Potter, which maybe has a slight twist here and there, or like in Star Wars, which again you have a slight twist here and there. They're pretty traditional, stories in that regard. I wanted to kind of pick it apart a little bit more, and think about the ways in which there can be a danger in relying on those stories and assuming they actually hold true in the real world in any kind of way.
So when you start to
Yeah.
layer on the personality aspects to some of your characters, how does some of that come from? Is that personal lived experience that you're playing out a little bit here? Is it is some of it just, obviously, kind of in service of story? Because like you've got Aida, right? Like, who is very, she's young in the grand scheme of this, right? And she's clearly got some power to her, which could inevitably be dangerous in a way. And so then how, right, like in the same way of building the cast, how then do you layer on maybe like some of the personality stuff?
A big part of that is just kind of letting, like winding them up and letting them run in your head a little bit and see how they bounce off each other. That's a big part of it. And it sounds a little bit abstract, but like I remember having a conversation with an old friend of both ours, Nick Lowe at Marvel, who is still a big editor there and a good friend. We were talking about kind of breaking apart or analyzing like the like Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin stuff. One thing that I think is cool about Martin's writing is, and this is an oversimplification, a lot of the characters are kind of like are motivational wind-up toys, and in the same way I was just describing. So like you have someone like Arya, who's survival is her thing, right? Or someone like Stannis Baratheon, who it's like for him it's like rigid letter of the law. I am king because I'm firstborn, and rigid self righteousness. Him, Ned Stark is honor, right?
Yep.
Uh, Tywin is like a very weird kind of like perverted sense of like family above everything in a kind of a weird way. And you can go on and on with different characters, and like again, I am oversimplifying, but there's a way in which you kind of like
It's there,
just
but it's there.
this is motivation. You wind them, and then you just let them bounce off the world, however it's going to happen. And there's no plot armor. There's no safety net for them, which is why we see what happens to Ned, or even in terms of like Sansa, who has this very, like idealism is kind of her kind of defining trait, and you see how that bangs up against the world. So it's not that I necessarily approach creating or writing character from like that mechanistic of a perspective, but there's a lot of conversation in writing around the idea of like knowing what characters' motivations are, and I think that's absolutely useful, if not 100% accurate. Like knowing what it is they want helps you then flesh out kind of the rest of them. Finding a motivation, finding an incentive for them in the world, and so with Aida. And this isn't getting any spoilers, kind of in some of the opening pages. Like for her, it's finding her mom is the first kind of real big drive for her.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then why does she want to find her mom? And then immediately those kinds of questions help me start kind of fleshing things out. What happens when it gets in the way of her finding her mom? Then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's having a seed of an idea for a character and letting them bounce off the world and bounce off each other, and that's where a lot of the interesting story happens. One thing that I think a lot of people can notice in poorly constructed stories is where the plot doesn't follow, like the characters are not the ones making the decisions to move the plot forward. The plot should follow. The plot is just what the characters choose to do and why they're choosing to do it. That should be
Right.
what it is. You have something though, like I don't know, like Rise of Skywalker, where it's just literally like, well, next I want the characters to do this, so they end up there. For some reason, Palpatine returned. Da 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 da. None of it is motivated by character in any kind of way. The reason why I think we find some stories much more compelling than others is because like we're invested in the characters and their choices and how their choices bounce off the world around them and how that kind of drives the narrative forward. So the point of mentioning any of that kind of stuff is a lot of this is who are the characters, find some seed for them, and then as they start bouncing off the world, that's where the story comes from.
So to kind of flip it a little bit and talk, not necessarily talk about the characters, but talk about the setting, right?
Yeah.
You've got this post-apocalyptic landscape, but then, and are dealing with, themes of, grief and trauma and identity and all that stuff. And so um, what is the thing that you are trying to say in dealing with these things as it is kind of set on the post-apocalyptic landscape?
I mean, the first thing I'm trying to say is like, hey, here's a fun comic and have a good time. That's the
That's
first
it.
bit. Like,
That's
it's yeah, no, I mean, and I say that both kind of like jokingly and not jokingly because like I'm thinking about a lot of shit when I'm writing this, and I'm trying to invest a lot of meaning and thematic and otherwise in it. I also just want it to be fun. I want it to be interesting, and so first and foremost, I want people to read it and have a good time. Category that is the goal I'm trying to make. I want this to be a crowd pleasing book. Um, I'm trying to say a lot of other shit too. So I think the biggest thing I kind of want the people to see the characters grappling with, because I'm not trying to preach. I'm not trying to tell people how to do anything, but the thing that I think they're dealing with and that I am dealing with, and I think that the world is kind of dealing with, is the whole issue of like how the fuck do we listen to each other and talk to each other, especially when we've hurt each other.
yeah.
you know. So like there's a soft mushy, center to the story that like I think is directly relevant to what's going on. But people are very good at picking up preachiness.
Right.
And I'm trying not to do that because I don't have fucking answers. I
Well,
have
okay. So let's talk about it because like this, you talked about it a bit. This book has got a bunch of action, and like anyone
yeah.
who's read any of your work or has seen any of your work knows that like you do big fun action. You do big fun action in a way that feels reminiscent to. I don't want to say '90s stuff because it feels like
There's a compliment version of that too. So
yeah,
yeah,
there's a compliment version of it, right? But like,
yeah,
but I think you do it in a way that like there's some clear inspiration there, right? Like we were just talking before, right behind you, you've got the art of Jim Lee kind of sitting behind you that from his X-Men stuff that you use as inspiration, and so when you can do the action on your own terms to make yourself happy, what goes to the wayside that maybe you couldn't have done before?
So probably the most fun I've had in mainstream comics was there's a scene in The Defenders that Brian and I were working on with Justin Ponzer on colors, where he just gave me 4 pages and just go loose. It's a fight between Iron Fist and Elektra, and here's kind of like one way of possibly kind of framing it, but just have fun. And so I spent like a week and a half on 4 pages, which is slow for me. really kind of like writing and drawing those 4 pages. By writing, for me, that was the choreography.
Mhm.
I really do enjoy dynamic action as much as I love dynamic characters in general.
Right.
I love choreography. I love there being like a reason for the fight, a reason for why they're doing what they're doing in the fight, and them looking fucking badass while they're doing it. I also like trying to find novel solutions. Like when I'm not in general, my job is really fucking fun. I get to draw and now write stories for a living, but there's a giant train with a clock face behind it chasing me all the fucking time. So sometimes I can't do this next thing, but like I try to always find new novel solutions for whatever it is I'm trying to do. I've been doing this for 12 years professionally and many years before that not professionally. I've drawn lots and lots of action, and like yeah, there are certain shortcuts I take, certain kind of defaults that I use, especially when I'm crunched for time. Um, I wanted this book to have that kind of had the choreography and the intricate action stuff that I like to do, but I also wanted to show some stuff that I haven't done before.
Mhm.
And so like one of the like visual motifs that I use in this story a lot actually relates a lot to the idea of language, which is like calligraphy. So
Mhm.
about 10 years ago, I really got into fountain pens.
Okay.
And even to the point where I will at times integrate that into my. I justified spending too much money on some pens, saying I was going to use them for work, and I do a little bit. They're also just fun.
Right.
And that got me really into the world of of calligraphy. And I'm not going to say I'm in any kind of way good at it, but
Mhm.
I appreciate it. And I spend a lot of time looking at it, assessing, and kind of experimenting a little bit with it. Also, both through that and through some family associations, I really got into kind of like Arabic calligraphy and within like Islam broadly, art has a very kind of like there's a complicated relationship with depictions of the prophet for one,
Mhm.
forbidden, but then representational art more broadly. And so one interesting kind of byproduct of that is the development of calligraphic art, especially given like the way that Arabic script functions and flows. It lends itself towards this really interesting artistic expression. And that was a really huge influence on this as well.
Okay.
So within the art itself, the point of mentioning any of that kind of shit is that because clearly I like to talk, about this stuff. The form of magic in this book takes the part of like literal script on the page,
Mhm.
so literal words as weapons, and on the one hand, it just looks like cool flowing magic stuff, but it also for me an opportunity to like just have some fun and something that I've been exploring on my own. Like I want to spend some time drawing, this kind of stuff. I also thought that it would be kind of a cool way of marrying some of the conceptual stuff with the visuals, which is what comics is all about. It's right, words
Right.
and pictures kind of married together. So within the action and outside of action as well, but especially within the action, that is something that I have not really played with before a whole lot, and it has been really like creatively fulfilling.
Mhm. That's awesome. I think the other thing that uh, I love about this book in particular, and like some of the stuff that I got from it, just just by reading it, is there are certain certain aspects where I you get to control the level of violence as well in this, that I think you may be restricted in doing work for hire stuff, and so it's but like that always seems like a tightrope to kind of walk in a sense, because you don't want it to be gratuitous, because then it could potentially become like that the book's identity in a sense,
Right.
but then also too you want it to be a bit more mature in that, and so how do you not get too gratuitous in it?
It was a fine line, and even there's a case where like, as someone I made the decision that this is not a book I want to have a mature label on. I
Right.
want it to be more accessible than that.
Yep.
Um, so like in the starting with language and then getting to the blood
Yeah.
and gore and stuff. Like originally, the opening page had the word "fuck," and I'm like, well, the thing is, I kind of want the kids to be able to read this, or like, high schoolers, middle schoolers. So
Sure.
I'll do wingdings. So wingdings, it feels a little bit gamey. So now I'll do kind of scratch out thing. But there's the thought process of like, again, not every idea is a good match for every story.
Sure.
And maybe, in fact, I also now have young kids has influenced my taste a little bit. Like my taste used to veer much more towards like much more graphic violence and everything,
Right.
and I find that less attractive now than I used to, just kind of psychologically, I suppose. And for this story as well, it's like, yeah, there's a fine line between the level of violence that fits the story and is necessary for the story versus like the word you use, gratuitous, right?
Hmm.
So for this one, like, yeah, you're not going to see like open rib cages with like guts strewn all over that.
Right.
This isn't crossed. This isn't whatever else. Like, that's a dated reference, but it was something that I had but conscious thought into,
Sure.
and so like there's maybe a little bit more blood than you might see that in maybe an X-Men comic, maybe a little bit. Even it's funny because like I even deal with this now, working on the big two stuff where if I look back at the stuff I was reading when I was in, like elementary school, like Jim Lee X-Men
Yeah.
comics from back in the day, like arguably they were maybe like more violent than the ones are now. You
Yes.
know?
100%.
Yeah, and so tastes change, standards change, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, for many people, working outside of the big two allows them to do stuff that is much more. They're able to push past boundaries that are imposed upon them at the big two.
Hmm.
For me, the boundary is not explicit content. For me, the boundary is like,
Look, I honestly I think adding the color that you've added to
sure,
this, right? The color
yeah,
being blood or whatever, it makes it more real, right? It makes the punches hit harder in
sure,
a sense, right? Like
yeah,
if someone gets punched in something and there's no you don't really see anything from it, then it's like, okay, then it feels more like a punch you see in professional wrestling than maybe
sure.
a punch that you would potentially see in real life, right?
Yeah, it,
It's
it
like,
makes it feel grounded and visceral in a way that it wouldn't
right.
otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, there is blood in the book,
Yeah.
and it serves a narrative purpose. It's
Right.
it's it's not there just to have it there.
Right.
Yeah.
For you, now that we're, pretty much on the eve of the book coming out, right? Just a few short weeks, right? And it's on pre-order or it's out now depending on when you're listening to this. What Taking everything that we've just talked about today, what's the most rewarding aspect of it, but also what is maybe the most terrifying aspect of it?
It's kind of the same answer in the classic job interview kind of way. Like, what's your
Right.
biggest weakness? I just care too much. I work too hard. One of the coolest things. Well, so it's the the scary thing and then the rewarding thing. I have to figure it all out,
Mhm.
and I get to figure it all out, right? So I love the collaborative aspect of comic books, and I never want to stop doing collaboration. But one of the coolest things that I've experienced doing this, where I'm writing and drawing a long form thing for myself for the first time, is it allows for such constant cross pollination
Mhm.
in storytelling. Normally, when I'm drawing a script, I may have the full issue, I may have half an issue of script. I don't really know where it's going. I may have a vague sense, and like I've been very blessed that with all my collaborations, the collaboration begins before I'm actually drawing a written script. Like talk about ideas, like what kind of stuff do you want to draw? Do you have any ideas for stories? And for Brian and Gail, we probably have like the most intertwined collaboration in that regard. Like Gail and I will talk about what to do with characters 3 arcs down the line, and when the script comes to me, some version of that is there. With this, though, I get to have complete control over that aspect of it, and in terms of trying to reinforce narrative beats that will land at the end of this arc. This is the first volume will be multiple volumes.
Mm.
Things that'll hopefully land 3-4 volumes down the line. Getting to kind of sow the seeds for that in the most subtle ways that maybe no one will ever notice, and that's fine. It's for me because I enjoy doing that.
Mm.
Or the way I happen to draw a character smirking in one panel, like, oh fuck, wouldn't it be cool if that changes the way that the story, that degree of like feedback
Mm-hmm.
with the narrative and getting to tie the art to theme, to character, to plot beats, getting to marry all that stuff together. That I have never experienced before, and that is fucking cool.
Mm.
In that way, like the deeply granular space for creativity, like it has been the most creatively rewarding experience I've had in comics. And that isn't to undermine or bash any of my creative partners. Like I
Sure.
love working with them, but this is its own very unique thing, and I want to keep doing more of it. I want to keep doing more Big Two stuff as well.
Yeah. Sure.
But it's like having done this once is like, oh man, like I'm gonna be chasing this dragon for a while. Like this is some good shit.
Right. Well, I guess so. So then on that too, right? I'd love to maybe get a little self gratuitous on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear from a creator who's worked with big names and have done it all. The what it means to you, maybe personally and professionally, that this is a book that will carry the Image eye.
So, an anecdote maybe kind of drives it home. So,
Let's do it.
the way that I got into reading comics was my dad taking me to the comic shop that was right next to the pool where I did swim team stuff in like
Okay.
elementary school. And just down the block, there's a comic shop, and he'd take me in like every week after practice on Wednesday, we'd go in, and I get to pick up a comic or two. And that was one of the ways that we kind of bonded. He
Mm-hmm.
would buy them as a collector investor, and then I would read them.
Sure.
So for years, my parents would pay really close attention to my career, and they'd have a pull box and all this kind of shit. And as they've gotten older and their own requirements, that's been less of the case. They have a general sense of what I do, but like I've been doing it for a while. It gets boring after a while.
Right.
But the other day he had texted me and he was like, "Hey, the Unchosen looks great." And I was talking to him on the phone about it, just kind of catching up. He's like, "Yeah, and man, I thought it was so cool seeing that you're doing it through Image. Like I remember when they first came out and taking me to the comic shop and everything. And like she choked him down just thinking about it a little bit because it's like there's a full circle kind of feeling to it of certainly like the Jim Lee's Uncanny X-Men is what got me into comics.
Right.
Wildcats is where I first kind of really fell in love with like it's kind of like, oh, this is now my thing. This isn't because I was there for it to be beginning
Right.
at the beginning, which is different than coming on a book 20 years out or 30 years after it first come out. So like the launch of Image was a very defining part of my comic book fandom,
Mm-hmm.
and then now getting to launch my first writer artist project that like and vibe wise, I mean also yeah, Wildcats is not a bad touch point for it in some kind of ways as well. Like
Sure.
it's action, it's cool looking, it plays with a couple big ideas. Like yeah, it feels like coming home in a very meaningful way, and the fact that like my dad picked up on that, like that's cool.
I love that. That's awesome, man. I gotta thank you for the incredibly insightful answers in that you shared today because I think it's one of those things that um this is a book that I believe that has such potential and such wide appeal in everything that's done that I think like fans of yours are gonna love this. This is the full David Marquez experience. I feel, but also too, I think like for someone who may maybe only be an indie reader, right? And sees this new book on the shelf. There's plenty in it for them to go and take. I guess one last one, and then I'll let you go. It feels like in talking to you that the genie is out of the bottle, and for you doing more like this. I mean, obviously this book in particular is one that you want to do for a while, but it also feels like that this is also the start of also very more cool things for you.
Thank you. And thanks for listening to me blather on endlessly about my nerdy shit. But no, I remember how I was talking to Brian about this recently. Bendis, like, part of it feels like I have something to prove. That's part of it, in a kind of a selfish, just ego-driven kind of way.
Cool.
But he says, like, no, it's okay because you're trying to prove it to yourself, and that's actually a more accurate thing. It's I want to prove to myself that, like, yes, I can draw, but I can write as well.
Yeah.
And I know that I can storytell.
Right.
Storytelling, writing, it is not quite the same thing in writing and drawing. There's some people who say, like, oh, if you can draw, you can write. Like, yeah, in some kind of ways. But there's some different muscles you got to flex on it.
Right.
It has been a learning experience. I'm very proud of the way the book has come out. I am very excited to do more writing. I am currently writing some stuff that will hopefully get announced pretty soon. It feels in some kind of ways like what I hope will be like a second phase of the career,
Right.
where it's less me kind of like a bad fucking analogy, but like it's less me just like in a boat on the ocean and more like me actually kind of like making things move myself a little bit.
Sure.
However that metaphor pans out. Great writer.
Well, awesome, man. Like I said, I appreciate the time. Like I said, depending on when you're listening to this, The UnChosen is either out, go pick it up, or it's coming out, go tell your retailer you need at least 3 copies. Dave, man, I appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim, man.
Well, there you go. Another episode of Let's Talk Comics in the can. The UnChosen is either out now or hitting shelves soon, depending on when you're hearing this. So do the thing. Call your shop. Pre-order it. Grab a few copies, and then let them know you are here for the full David Marquez experience. This is a big book with big ideas, killer action, ton of heart, and it's just the beginning of what's next for Dave Marquez as a writer and an artist. So big thank you to Dave for coming on, for being honest, being generous with his time, and, being as thoughtful about story as anyone else that we've had on the show. So if you enjoyed this episode, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and share it with your crew. We've got plenty of awesome, incredible creators lined up. You're not going to want to miss the next episodes, I promise. So go to your comic shop, like I said, buy some comics, read some comics, come back here, and we'll talk about it. I'll catch you later.